So good morning, everybody. I think it's just about still morning. Good morning. My name's Tom Ray. I work for a consulting company called Cloudreach. We are a cloud integrator. For my sins, despite my accent, I actually do live in the United States. I live in New York, and I've come through to Chicago to share some of our experiences with you today. And I'm very blessed to have Stu Katz from the Warner Music Group, and Stu will be sharing some of his experiences with you as we go through the session today. So before we get started, I was curious to find out who's in the audience today. So a very quick piece of audience participation. Do you want to put your hands up if you're using Amazon already? Okay, so what have we got here then? Okay, so probably about half the room. Okay, and out of the people who put your hands up, how many of you have got what I would call a mature sort of, if you like, adoption program in place, specifically thinking about things like security? How many of you are there with that and feel like you're in a good place? Put your hands up. Okay, no hands go up. So hopefully we can share some experiences with you today, which will hopefully help you understand how you may go about doing just that. So, introductions, myself and Stu have done just that. I'm going to give you a bit of a view of what's happened over the last 12 months. In fact, I was just chatting to a gentleman called Dave. I don't know where Dave's gone. And I met him at the event last year, and we were just commenting on the fact that the event this year in Chicago is significantly bigger. There's a lot more of you here, quite a broad breadth of customers and users of Amazon. It's great to see. I'm going to give you a few some of my thoughts on the market. I'm also going to go a little bit through the business case, what we see from our customers, why are they doing this, how they're going, what's their thought process behind the move, and giving you some practical steps on where to start on that journey. So, how do they piece together their adoption program? I'll touch very briefly on the Amazon adoption framework, and then build that segue into the experience that Stu and Warner Music Group have had in their cloud adoption journey, and with a particular emphasis upon security. So, view of the market then. What's happened in the last 12 months? Well, it's been a pretty busy time. As I say, I think just coming here is a real kind of litmus test when you go to these big summits and you see both the volume of people, but also the types of speakers and the use cases which are being put forward. It's the breadth and depth of the different workloads and use cases that we see moving out to Amazon is increasing all the while. It's, I think just on that bottom bullet there on the bottom left, the traditional businesses moving, we do see more and more, I would very much say we're in the early majority of the move out to the cloud. And what do I mean by that? Well, we've got a lot more organizations which perhaps 3 or 4 years ago would be slightly reticent about the move. They wouldn't perhaps have understood all the concepts and the potential business opportunity. So for example, this year we've done an awful lot more work with financial services businesses, with construction organizations. So very, very traditional, and those scope of those engagements is very much broadening. So what we're seeing is not sort of tactical workloads, can we move application A, or can we build a brand new application Y? It's much more wholesome. So people are looking at shutting down data centers, moving much larger chunks of infrastructure, or moving their key strategic bets, if you will, application bets to generate more revenue, moving them out into Amazon. Personally, from a Cloudreach point of view, a lot's changed in our world as well. We've grown almost 100% this last year, so there's about 250 Cloudreachers dotted across North America and Europe. It's been great fun, and here in Chicago, we've got a team of, I think, 10 or 12, including architects, cloud systems developers, and others that are getting involved on our cloud journey, so it's great to see. So just a little bit more about this mode 1, mode 2. So these terms come from Gartner, and they talk about bimodal IT, so to kind of differentiate between these two columns here. In the first column, mode 1, this is the non-differentiating workload. So this is common IT, if you like, that you would see across most organizations. And the business case here in this first column is much more orientated around cutting costs. So just to give you an idea, this week alone in my inbox, if you were to take a look at it, I've got 6 opportunities from various organizations who all want to move their entire data center to Amazon. Okay. Now in this last year, that process, if you like, the working out the mechanics of how to do that, the tooling, the process, and the methodologies are very much matured, not just with Cloudreach, but in the market in general. and people are moving much more at scale. So to give you an idea, within that, there's 6 opportunities. We've got one at 4,500 VMs, another one's 1,000 VMs, another one with 50 VMs. There's a real mixture in there. And all of these, if you like, are from existing data centers, either in colo or physically owned data centers. They're looking to move out. So people have got a high degree of confidence in both in the ability and the technology that enables you to be able to do that. Then the business case on the right-hand side, mode 2, is about generating new revenue. And we're seeing more and more organizations, perhaps that haven't experimented in this space or very limited, are doing much, much more. So we're seeing people, organizations working with things like, for example, IoT, Internet of Things. So yesterday I was very lucky to be at an IoT roundtable hosted by Amazon here in Chicago. And it was fascinating listening to organizations. I guess traditionally IoT was the domain of people like utility companies or oil and gas businesses. And the stories we were hearing yesterday of a much more diverse set of organizations that are willing to experiment with these technologies. And Amazon, because of its consumption model, makes it very easy to experiment and trial these different technologies. And these technologies are the types of things which are going to give you differentiating, to help you differentiate in the market and help generate new revenues for you. So, this is all good stuff, Tom, but where do you start? How do you go about bringing these projects to life? Well, within CloudReach, the way we organize ourselves is we have 3 lines of business. You can see them on the left-hand side there. So we have something called Cloud Platform, Cloud Enablement, which is the part of business that I run, and Cloud Operations. And it's these 3 groups of individuals, these 3 teams, which help us deliver across a number of competencies. And as I was talking to Stu before, the pieces you can see on the right-hand side there, out of all of them, these are like specializations that we have within our organization. The top one, Cloud Data Center there, is really your mode 1, okay? So this is non-differentiating, moving large-scale applications out into Amazon, okay? Interestingly, the other 2, 3, 4, 5, I was about to say 6, it is another 6 there, to check my maths. The other 6 are all orientated around mode 2 in one shape or form. And then we see these, and we group all of these under sort of our more innovative competencies. And there'll be more that we'll add to that list over the next 12 months. Now, the one we're particularly focused on today is cloud adoption. So cloud adoption for us is almost like a de facto that all of our customers have an element of cloud adoption. So away from your specific projects, it's the program of things that you're going to do to enable you to be able to run Amazon at scale and do it efficiently, effectively, securely. And it's us about providing you with the right framework in which to do that. So Amazon, within the Amazon team, and some of you may or may not have used them before, there is the Amazon ProServe team. So the ProServe team are an arm of Amazon Web Services. They have a team based here in Chicago and many other cities across the Midwest. And those individuals help provide and augment the partner ecosystem to provide support to organizations looking to move out into Amazon. Now, they use the framework you can see up on the screen here. It's called the Cloud Adoption Framework, or the CAF. And there's 7 different perspectives on there. Okay, so you've got the business perspectives. What does this mean for the business? Platform maturity, people. I'm going to talk a little bit more about people in a moment. Process, operating, and security. Okay, so these are all the things you need to think about. All right, and the point on the right there is, cloud adoption is more than just a migration of a workload. It's a massive transformation, but it's a very positive one. And your experience and your framework, your adoption program will be very unique to you as an organization, okay? So depending on how you're structured, do you outsource, do you insource, depending on whether you develop your own applications or not, all these factors will determine what your adoption program will look like. So taking that as a framework, that's all good stuff. And Stu and I were talking about this very point. This is a framework, but what are the practical things that need to happen? And how do I make this into, if you like, a practical to-do list? Because I think all of us love a list that we can cross things off, feel like you're achieving things. So under our cloud adoption competency, it's an appreciation that all the customers need it. We build out these practical steps. It gives you the action plan, if you will. Okay. What I would say is this isn't something that needs to happen as a precursor to anything happening within the cloud. My point here is that this is something which will happen in parallel with all of your projects. If you think of a number of work streams, okay, you'll have a cloud adoption work stream. And inside the cloud adoption work stream, you'll be looking at things like skills gap analysis. You'll have your cloud operating model, all these different component parts. And within that, you bear out your action plan, but it's very much you prioritize that plan because you don't need all of it. And in fact, the one thing that Stu and I were talking about is, when you're moving out the sort of sequential number of workloads out into Amazon, there'll be a natural prioritization of what you need to do. So there's like the minimum viable, if you like, product, the minimum viable cloud that you need to deliver day one. And then you'll iterate that depending on the workloads. Let's say, for the sake of argument, your first workloads might be some test dev workloads. Okay, so there's no sensitive data there. The applications aren't customer-facing. So your operating model, your adoption, if you like, protocol, for want of a better term, will look very different than if I project that further down the line, and maybe you're moving your trading platforms, PCI workloads out. So you're going to iteratively change this over a period of time. So it's an ongoing process, and as I say, it will be very unique to you as an organization. So what we've done then as CloudReach is we've taken the adoption framework from Amazon, and we've broken it down into these manageable steps. And what you can see in the diagram there is this idea that you've got the 4 pillars that support your business architecture and cloud strategy. Okay? So if I walk you through each of these, I can sort of try to exemplify what I mean by each component part. And it's these methodologies and the tooling materials around this which makes this tangible and easy to consume. So first pillar on the left-hand side is operations. So by moving across workloads into Amazon, if you think of it from an operations perspective, who's going to operate this? Amazon provide a very comprehensive support package themselves, but they only go so far in terms of the support model. So how are you going to supplement that? Are you going to do it yourselves? Are you going to use a specialist third party? If you're doing it yourselves, how are you going to upskill your staff? What are the new workflows going to be? If you've got a P1 outage and you need to ascertain, is this an Amazon-related issue? Is it something in my application code? That support model, who are you going to call? How are you going to arbitrate and get into root cause analysis will look different within a cloud-based workload. So there's work to be done there. From a security point of view, this is close to Stu's heart, and he's going to talk about this in depth in a moment. Security, of course it's important whether you're in the cloud or not in the cloud. And the point I'd make here is, actually by moving to the cloud, this becomes a damn sight easier. There's the shared responsibility model, which Stu will take you through, and it's understanding the differences, if you will, the nuances of moving out to the cloud. Well, my toolkit's going to look a little bit different. Some of the skills I need are going to look a little bit different. So how do I package that all up, and then what does it mean to me? We've got visibility. So if you walk around the partner hall here, you'll see lots of people getting involved in this space especially. So people doing visualization of what's going on inside your cloud infrastructure. So what are you spending? What workloads have you deployed? How well utilized are they? How well governed are they? And so on and so forth. So visualizations, that kind of wrapper around that. And what reporting do you want to provide back to whom? So what does your InfoSec lead want? In what format? What does your accounting department want? In what format? I mentioned this, I think, this time last year was, don't forget about all those support organizations. Your cost in the cloud model looks quite different. It will vary. So there's an educational point there. So from a visibility point of view, it's going to be, are you going to do chargebacks, showbacks? In some cases, I've seen shamebacks, where they want to pick on certain developers that are spending a lot more than perhaps they should be. But the point being is how you want to visualize that. And then lastly, we've got governance, what guardrails you're going to put in place. So things like tagging compliance might be a good idea. So as you're deploying workloads, you'll have a nomenclature around your tagging. So what's the metadata I'm going to associate with all the assets I've got running on Amazon? How do I enforce that? How do I make sure that's consistent across my whole estate? So then the 4 pillars, and underneath that you've got the rather dry term business architecture, which I don't think I particularly like, but there we are. What I mean by that is, it's how are you organized? And Stu's got a cracking slide he'll show you in a moment, talking about this very point. As an organization, so if you think about how you're organized as a series of teams at the moment, that team structure that's going to support, deploy, and create assets within Amazon is going to look potentially a little bit different. And understanding that business change is a key, if you like, underlying foundational element to this. Because without that, who's going to know who's doing what, and you'll find your adoption of cloud technology will slow down if you don't cover that point off. So to make this all come to life and to make this real, we've come up with the Cloud Reach Cloud Security Framework. And it leans on best practice. It leans on input from a number of different security frameworks. And we've made this relevant to Amazon Web Services. And it comes with connected, if you like, methodology, a set of processes that go alongside this, if you like, your to-do list in terms of security. And on that note, I'd love to introduce Stu. And Stu's going to take you through what this looks like from a customer's perspective. So Stu, thanks very much.
Thank you. So hello, everyone. A little bit about me. I've been at Warner Music Group for about 3.5 years. I'm a bit of an odd duck because I came up through the ranks from UX and design and applications and that kind of stuff, and not from an engineering point of view. So when I come in and look at problems, I have a sort of a slightly different perspective than some of my peers. I want to talk a little bit about the context for Warner Music Group and our cloud adoption, because from my perspective, we've already taken the first step. We have workloads up there, and the story that I want to tell you a little bit about today around security was really our first big challenge on that journey, right? I wish I had seen Matt's keynote a little while back, because he said, you can move fast and be secure, and you can have it all together. Well, we didn't quite do that, right? We moved fast, and then, as I'm going to talk about, went back and said, oh, we should probably worry about security, right? From Warner Music Group's perspective, we care about artists. We care about artists and artist services and things like that. Things that are several degrees away from that sort of core business, things like data centers and hardware and things like that, are things that we don't really want to work on, that we don't really want to pay attention to, right? And the other piece of context is we're in the midst of sort of a several-year effort to update and modernize our technology landscape, right? And so it kind of makes sense that if you're modernizing things, that the things you don't want to work on, you kind of give to somebody like AWS to worry about. So like I said, we were up in the cloud. All our new shiny development platform was all on AWS. And we were running workloads up there, and they were important, but they weren't really mission critical. This was us sort of dipping our toe in the water. And so while we had stuff up there, it was fine. We'd gone through, we have an enterprise agreement. We'd gone through architectural reviews. We had gone through penetration testing. We were actually pretty comfortable with what our security model was up there. Oh, man, they don't want to hear about security? Come on. All right. And so we were all good until we looked at sort of the roadmap for later this year, and we saw that there were some some sensitive workloads that we were going to be putting up there that our current security posture probably wasn't good enough for, right? And that we should think about improving that security posture given what we were doing. Going back to Tom's slide, I'm talking more about mode 2 stuff primarily, but this is a little bit of the mode 1 stuff sort of creeping in, right? And so in order to do this, So in order to do this, we had to bring together folks from a number of different parts of the organization. So we had the information security folks who are smart and nice and well-meaning and have been in that role for something like 10,000 years. They're used to operating at the tail end of the process, where you come to them and at the very end they say, oh, you missed this, and scramble, scramble, scramble. They weren't really comfortable operating at the front of the process, giving requirements in advance, right? The other folks that we had to deal with in a similar vein were the network operations guys who were used to, well, I'm just going to put a giant appliance at the front door of my data center and call it a day, right? And so they were very uncomfortable. And it took a lot to sort of get their heads wrapped around ideas around micro perimeter and all those other kind of buzzwords that says, all the stuff that you know today really is different. It's similar, but it really is different. And so bringing those folks along. We also had folks from the DevOps group, right? And so you have to understand, DevOps was a new group in the organization. And so they were used to a kind of a Wild West environment where, they saw a problem in production in one of the configs, they went in and changed it. There was no real thought or recognition of change management or access control or things like that, right? And so we needed to bring some discipline and control to their day-to-day. And the last group was engineering, and this was the piece of how do we bring sort of that security mindset into the development lifecycle, into the origin, so that we start thinking about and implementing security at the earliest stages instead of the mad scramble at production. And so we had to bring together all of these groups. And it reminds me of the joke, right? So how do porcupines kiss? Very carefully, right? And that's exactly what we had. Oh, that bombed. Anyways, so that's what we had. We had a number of folks from very, very different perspectives all trying to work together. And if you're on that journey of adoption, I really cannot emphasize this enough, that you have to recognize the cultural clashes that you're going to encounter, right? In a separate project, we lost months of productivity because of dysfunctional bad behavior, where this guy insisted on this thing, and that guy said he was wrong, and the other guy said he didn't know anything, and so forth and so on, right? And so in the context of the security work, we took great pains to really bring along all of the different teams and to have lots of meetings with cookies and get a positive atmosphere. We would have had more meetings with beer, but some of the folks were in UK, which means New York folks have to have the meeting at 11 o'clock. So anyways. But the point is that we spent a lot of time developing a shared understanding of what we were trying to do, as well as getting it so that the individuals could start to articulate what the other's perspective was, so that the DevOps folks could say, yeah, I know what network's going to say, and actually be right, and start to represent that cross perspective in what they're doing. We talked to our relationship manager. We said, Jayme Wallace is his name. He's a super great guy. And said, this is what we want to do. Who are the big players in the security space, right? And so, gave us some names. We went to Reinvent. But we spent a lot of time with the shared security model, right? Which is this, right? So from my perspective, because seeing a number of AWS presentations, it seems like if the presentation is about security, you will see this slide, right? And this slide is actually really, really good, right? This slide is very clear as to what is your responsibility and what is AWS's responsibility. And it's very straightforward, and so we spent a lot of time with this. The problem with this slide is it's not really actionable, right? It doesn't necessarily lend itself to, this is my action plan. I'm going to write my to-do list, and I'm going to check it off and burn on through it, right? And so while we really like the slide, we weren't really sure where to go next. So, like I said, we went to Reinvent, right? And I walked up and down the aisle in the expo, and anybody who had security in their offering, I stopped to talk to them, right? I hit the guys that Jayme told me, and I hit every other guy in the expo. And we generally burned through a couple months talking to a ton of vendors, right? As my boss puts it, it's free consulting, right? And so we learned a lot along the way. We learned a lot about what this vendor provides and this vendor provides. But also what we saw was that there wasn't really a clear pattern, right? There wasn't some, it's either reference architecture A, B, or C, and you just tweak it and you're done, right? The space is still maturing, right? And so for us, it wasn't obvious what the solution was that we would need in order to implement this. So we called Uncle. We said, we can't do this. We need to look elsewhere. So went back to Jayme, got a couple more recommendations for 2 premier partners, CloudReach being one of them, and said, solve this for us, right? Just please tell us what the answer is. Get us to that action plan where we can have a punch list that we can just burn through and understand sort of what we need to do. And it's funny because out of the 2 vendors, one of the reasons why we chose CloudReach was because they were the only ones that all the porcupines agreed on, right? And from my perspective, I was utterly amazed that that happened, right? And I think part of it was because CloudReach was really good at internalizing and articulating back what our concerns were in that context. So they came in, they talked to a bunch of folks, they developed a nice series of recommendations. And the most important and I think useful thing that came out of the exercise was this, right? And so this, to me, was that next level of that upper blue section in the shared security model, right? And this said, all right, at every level of the stack, these are the security concerns, right? And you can go through each of those boxes and say, this is, 3 or 4 good vendors that do this. And vendor A is, a little better. Vendor B is a little more expensive. Vendor C is good, but not quite the right fit for you and what your needs are, right? And so the interesting thing, when you start to unpack this and look at this, and by the way, forgive me, I'm not going to talk about what our specific choices are because it's security, and there's that whole slide about paranoia. But the interesting thing about the stack is that you'll find some vendors actually check off multiple boxes, right? And so while they may not be the best at box A or at box C, when you bring them on, you improve your overall security posture, right? And you have a view of not just that you are here and you're there, but that you are improving, right? And you are taking sort of that journey of incrementally improving your security posture sort of in the cloud. I think that's about it. So I'll take any questions for either Tom or me. In the back?
So more like a consulting engagement, did you become empowered free from that at some point when you took skills in-house?
So the question was, is this more of a consulting engagement, and did we take skills and capabilities or empowered in-house, right? And so the short answer is we already had a few folks who were good and proficient and capable in this, and so the short answer is yes, it was a professional engagement, but yes, we also learned a lot from this, right? Because there was a lot of healthy discussion. And the place where we actually grew and learned the most wasn't in my cloud architect, who kind of knew a lot of this stuff already. The place where we actually grew the most was the information sec guys and the network operations guys, and that sort of shared understanding and bringing along the folks who are more reticent and uncomfortable in the space. That was the sort of the apart from just solving the puzzle and figuring out which vendors we wanted to use for security.
For ongoing, you use an MSP to help you support what you're doing day-to-day with growing up?
We are having that conversation right now. So that is still to be determined.
So you talked about that you made the first step. So what was, when did you get to the second step? Obviously you did, and what moved to the cloud next, and then where are you in terms of that evolution? And related back to what you said is important to you, like the artists, and what part of their business is moving on the cloud from a consumer perspective?
Okay, there's some things that the CorpCom people told me not to talk about, so I might be a little vague on a couple points. So when I took over the engineering from a sort of previous administration, we were actually on 4 cloud providers, right? We have Cloud Foundry. There was a belief that we were going to sit on top of Cloud Foundry and float across all cloud providers and be utterly agnostic, right? And so when I took over, we sat in Blue Box Tier 3, AWS, and Rackspace, right? And if any of you are going, dear God, why would you be on 4 cloud providers? That was kind of my reaction, right? So the last year or so has been working to simplify and bring that down, right? So we kind of, I don't know if you'd say cheated in our first step in the cloud. And part of that arc and that journey for us has been rationalizing that, simplifying that, and bringing it to sort of a more orderly operating model. The second part is the artist services, right? And so this is, I will say, this is a capability that we are delivering to the business, right? That we're building out on sort of the new platform. That is, the workloads that we have up there, you know, if it got out in the public space, wouldn't really matter too much. The work that we're gearing up to do later this year, right, would be much more sensitive, right? And so part of this security exercise is in preparation for that. So to call back to the earlier point, you might say, well, this is actually your 3rd big challenge in the cloud. The first one was getting out of 4 and into 1 was our first big one. And so now we're on to the security piece that as we migrate more serious workloads, we have to sort of up our game from a posture point of view. Does that answer?
Where do you run your back-end financial systems to run the business? Not that I get the content, the artist piece, but what about your core guts?
That's in data centers, colo data centers. So that is actually a whole other initiative where we're looking at migrating all of that up into the cloud now, right? And so probably in the next 6 months or so, maybe 10, all the financial systems will move up into the cloud. We're not hesitant from oh my goodness, right? It's just a matter of, like I said before, our technology landscape's a little bit muddled, and so it's not a trivial like, oh, I'm just going to pick it up. Most of it's virtualized anyway, so we can move it, but we don't want to do it, there's a sort of a dumb way of lifting and shifting, and then there's a better way of doing it, and so I think we're trying to gear ourselves up for the better way.
What percent of your workloads would you say are currently deployed on AWS? And in 18 months' time, what would you expect it to be there?
I'm going to say probably 10% is up on AWS now. In 18 months, I would expect that number to be 90 to 100, right? So like I said, we're bimodal, right? So all of our mode 2 stuff is there now, and somewhere over the next 6 to 12 months, 6 to 10 months, whatever, all the mode 1 stuff will sort of get up there.
So what are the steps and the tasks to prep up the in-house resources and capabilities to be ready for this?
The steps we took. So one, 2 of those groups already report to me. So it's easy for me to pick out of my team and allocate time and effort to doing these things. I also have the responsibility of building that in-house capability. So from the DevOps and the engineering side, it was relatively easy. The InfoSec and the network side, I schmoozed my peer into, hey, we need some of your guys to really help us with this stuff. But because, in answer to the gentleman's other question, because it's clear we are all moving there, even though the InfoSec and the network guys are sort of a little uncomfortable in the space, they know it's coming, right? And so there's both a hesitancy and a willingness to learn how to do that stuff, right? So I'm not sure I'm answering your question other than just sort of clearing the decks for some key folks. So I wasn't there at one time. Dev and QA were on AWS, and staging and prod were on Blue Box, right? And there's a whole raft of complexities that you don't really need when you have a setup like that. So I wasn't there for the original selection of AWS in that context. My selection criteria wasn't oh, I'm just going to the cloud for the first time. Let me review all of the providers and figure out which one's best. It was, I've got some private, I've got some public, I've got some that are, I'll say it, performing better than others. And so out of that context, it really was very easy to pick AWS, right? On most of the criteria that we were running through, apart from the public-private thing, AWS was, giving us better service, at a better price, easier to deal with, so forth, so on, so on. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
You talked about an 18-month time frame to get everything to Amazon. Do you have stranded assets, capital you invested in, big storage boxes, data centers? Like, how did did timing just work out that you have to be finishing them up in 18 months, or fire sale coming down to buy some stuff?
So first of all, he mentioned 18 months. I didn't. I said 6 to 12, right? So the second point, we actually just renegotiated the contract with the folks who run our data centers for us. And so it was in the context of that we knew this was coming up. So we can drop down to something like 5%, right? From a cost basis. So we're ready to do it when the other side of the house is ready to do it. There's a.
So you mentioned Foundry. So are you using that for applications?
Yep.
AWS services?
So it's funny. I was just talking about this with Tom. So we are using it for applications. So all the new applications that we spin up are on Cloud Foundry. There's 2 points about that. So one point is we're in the midst of the to Cloud Foundry or not to Cloud Foundry question that we're sort of circling around internally and trying to figure out, do we really want to stay there, or do we want to just commit ourselves to Lambda and Beanstalk and all that other cool stuff, right? The second part of that is a lot of our development's offshore. We rotate some of the guys over. One of the guys who came from one of the application teams made a comment that most of his peers don't even realize that we're on AWS, right? That they see Cloud Foundry, they see sort of all the developer tools, and that's as far as they get, right? Which is both encouraging and sort of oddly disturbing at the same time. Again, this goes back to the historical context, which is I inherited it, and I think it has served us well in the migration and bouncing between all the different cloud providers, right? I still question if in 5 years it will still be a good decision, right? And when I look at the pace of innovation on AWS and I see Lambda, we've used Lambda in a couple tiny, super tiny little ways, but I also see some of the future applications that we expect to be building and could see them, how they could be architected in Lambda at super easy peasy ways, right? And so there's a push-pull against that stuff.
Yes, can you speak regarding any middleware that you have and what type of licensing challenges that you might face for those that don't have necessarily a cloud licensing model or pricing model?
Probably not. You'd have to get one of my architects to actually answer that question. I'm sorry. As a general rule, we are open source. We favor open source on pretty much everything. There's a few exceptions where, and I'm talking only about the Mode 2 stuff. Mode 1 stuff is Oracle and SAP and all those horrible things. The new stuff is Elastic, although we do selectively buy things like Pentaho is one of the ones that we're picking up.
One more, if you don't mind. What are you going to do with your Oracle and your SAP deployments? Are you moving those to SaaS, or are you going to be deploying those on top of AWS, or still on?
That's a current debate. That's why that exact conversation is the current debate. Like we had a project come through, and that team that runs SAP and the financials were like, oh, in order to support this, we need $180,000 of hardware. And I kind of looked at them like, really? You want to run around and say that kind of stuff? So that is a debate that is kind of running around, and that's part of the 6 to 12 months that you're giving us 18 months to do, will be that answer, right?
Yeah. That's very atypical as well. Move to open source, and with a cloud-first strategy, people going SaaS first. For non-differentiating workloads, they're looking at things like Workday or going down the Salesforce route.
Yeah.
Very popular. Yeah.
We just installed Workday.
There we go. Yeah.
Other
Okay.
questions?
I think we're
at?
there on time. So,
okay.
Stu, might I say thank you very much for coming today and sharing your experience. Very much appreciated, and thank you all very much for coming. So, thank you.
Thank you.